Hello and welcome to the Herdline Podcast, hosted by Trace Johnson and the Herds Headset. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode where the Headset and Trace talk all things Marshall athletics. Be sure to follow us on X and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. Now, sit back, relax, and let's talk the herd.
Welcome back to the Herdline Podcast. Trace and the Herds Headset with you as we're getting ready to dive back into our Looking at Former Marshall Basketball Coaches series. It's been on a little bit of a brief hiatus for some really good reasons because we've had two excellent guests here recently with Mario Harvey and John Elmore. So very excited about those episodes. And we're excited to get back into the Coaches series because we have a very prominent coach to talk about from Marshall basketball history today in Greg White. Of course, we'll get into all that later on here coming up soon. And then we only have one more episode to do. And it's going to be a collective look at all the coaches prior to Greg White. So not that some of them don't deserve their own episode. It's just, we can't do that. We can't take that much time to look at everybody like individually. It would just take too long. And we're getting really close to football season. So we got a lot coming up on this podcast for football season. I can promise you that. So exciting times lie ahead for sure. But before we dive into this episode, how you doing, man?
Yeah, things have been going great, and this is a pretty interesting episode. Kind of like you were mentioning, when you talk about Greg White, he's really somebody in Marshall history that I don't think is talked about nearly as much as what he should be. There was ups and downs, and we're going to talk about those ebbs and flows of his career. But man, overall, there was a lot of success. Some of the best basketball players that we have ever seen here in Marshall history walked through the doors whenever he was coaching. And so this should be a really interesting episode. An unsung hero, I think, in Marshall basketball history is one Greg White.
I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, even as a player, I mean, he was just one of the best we had ever had at that point and still is. And, the fact that he was able to double down and turn that into a head coaching reign later on. And he had a lot of success and had some ups and downs. And, we're going to talk about all that. But, yeah, he's definitely one of the more prominent but yet underrated figures in Marshall basketball history, no doubt, in my mind. So to talk a little bit about the hiring, the beginning stages here, just to kind of set the stage for what he would end up doing. He was hired first off the gate in April of 1996. I could not find the exact date, but it was April of 1996. He, of course, replaced Billy Donovan, who went on to be a legendary coach at Florida and the NBA and all over the place. So great. I mean, Marshall gave Billy Donovan his first head coaching job. He kind of made that work for himself. But so Greg White replaced Billy D there. And then he's also a Mullins, West Virginia native, same town as the D'Antonis. So, I mean, he's very close with them, knows them. Obviously he played a lot. I think he even worked out with Mike a lot when Mike was coming up into coaching and stuff. So he's very familiar with the D'Antonis. Great. I mean, Mullins, West Virginia, what was in the water down there? I mean, man, all these basketball guys come out of Mullins. And Greg White played at Marshall from 1977 to 1981. Very prominent player for the Herd, a record-setting point guard, and ended up setting I don't know if it's a record, but it was at the time, I guess, started 113 straight games. That is impressive. I mean, you're not going to see that in today's landscape with everybody moving around. You're not going to see that probably ever again. He had 1,024 career points, 701 assists, which at the time was number one in school history, which now it's been broken, but it's still one of the tops in school history in assists. He led the Southern Conference 3 times in assists, and he has a 86.4 career free throw percentage. Nothing to sneeze at there either. Marshall Athletics Hall of Famer in 1993. Taking a look at some of his coaching stops, quite a few before he got to Marshall officially as the head coach. He was a Marshall student assistant from 1981 to 1982. And then after that, he was the Pikeville head coach from 1984 to 1989, where he compiled a record of 47 and 89. So not a ton of success there, but still he had been a head coach at a smaller school. He's trying to get his feet wet, and he was able to do that. And then after that, he became the head coach at the University of Charleston from 1990 to 1995. And in 1992, he was the West Virginia Intercollegiate Athletic Conference Coach of the Year, really good year. Overall, there you see he goes 68-70. And then from 1995 to 1996, he gets a big opportunity to be an assistant at UCLA, and that really put him on the map for Marshall at that point when they were looking to replace Billy Donovan. I mean, a really high major assistant there. I mean, a basketball blue blood at that point, So that really helped, and the fact he's a Marshall guy, obviously, he's going to always be in the picture. So at that point, yeah, I think people would have had to have been pretty excited about it, bringing a Marshall guy back. I know that's something that we always look forward to doing. I know that's things that athletic directors dream of, is bringing back an alum to lead your program. That's just a great thing all around. So talk a little bit about all those stops that Greg White had made up to that point and what he brought to the table there for Marshall early on.
Well, you mentioned it, like whenever we talk about Marshall in particular and something that has really cemented as time has gone on, and we have seen outsiders try and come in and lead the program in different aspects in different sports, it usually will just go smoother whenever you have somebody that knows the area, that's from the state of West Virginia. Because we've talked about this in the past too on different podcasts, that West Virginia people are just a little bit different than everywhere else in the world. And some people may think that's a good thing, others may think that's a bad thing, but it's the truth. We are a different breed of human beings here. And whenever you have somebody who is able to really understand the culture, the dynamic, the story of Marshall collectively, things will just go a lot better. Especially if they're good, right? Even if they're not a great coach, there's still a mutual respect between the people and the coach. But man, whenever you kind of put everything together and you can really find a way to win, like, you are going to be beloved beyond measure. So, being from Mullins, of course, that's one great thing. And then coaching just right down the road for a number of years at UC, a huge advantage. And, looking through his numbers here, it really is almost a mirror image to what he would eventually do here at Marshall. There was good years and there was not so good years. 1991 and 1992, his team went 21-9. And, they were in the NAIA division first round. So, I mean, that's like the equivalent of March Madness to the Division II. And so, I mean, that's a fantastic, year. And then that next year, they would be in the NAIA District 28 playoffs. And so, he had some success and different things, but still, we're going to find in his career there at UC that he had more losing seasons than he had winning seasons, which is so unique to me, because even though he had the losing seasons, he was able to then go and kind of really, in my opinion, elevate himself and put himself in a fantastic position being assistant at UCLA. There's not a whole lot of other schools out there that are more prestigious in basketball than UCLA, especially being a guy just from West Virginia. I would be very interested. I don't know if you know this or not, but I'd be interested to see what connection he made in his career to be able to eventually go to UCLA. But nevertheless, after that one season, he did come back here to Marshall, and things were going to ramp up, and there was going to be, again, like we said, good times, and then there was not so good times. But that's a special moment, being able to come back to your alma mater and to coach the very program where you were, cutting your teeth and playing and putting in a lot of work. And let's face it, he had a very, very, very difficult job in following up what really, in my opinion, is the greatest and I guess you could say most complete coach in all of Marshall history. He didn't last long here, Billy Donovan, but in my opinion, there was nobody that would be a better X's and O's and just overall understanding of the game than Billy D. So trying to, follow that up, that's a tough gig. And I definitely did not, I would not envy that position. However, we're going to see that, again, there were some good moments. And so it should be a really, really interesting conversation, like I said at the start. But overall, I would assume that Marshall fans would be pretty excited. I don't know if this was lighting the world on fire by any means, because when you look at his UC resume, and he made it to that with their equivalent of March Madness once, but other times were not so great. So I would assume that there was a mixed bag of feelings and emotions whenever he first got hired on.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair too. I mean, I do like the fact that, I know a lot of people's criteria when they hire a coach is, well, I want you to have been a head coach before. I know a lot of people think that. A lot of people will live and die by that. And the fact that he had been a head coach for, I mean, what, a decade total? I mean, at that point, I mean, it had been a while, and yeah, it wasn't all success, but like that's still a lot of head coaching experience up to that point at smaller, level schools. So I think that really provided a nice starting base for what he was going to do at Marshall. And the fact that he, is a Marshall alum and cared so much about Marshall, loves it. I think that was extra incentive in itself. Not that you needed extra incentive, but that was definitely something extra. So looking at his first year, man, oh man, they were absolutely so close to being a team that we still would have talked about to this day, probably. His first year in the 96-97 season, this was Marshall's last year in the Southern Conference. The Herd goes 20-9 overall, 10-4 in the Southern Conference. They tied for the Southern Conference North Division regular season title back in those days that they had divisions, not just one full conference. They tied for that. They started the year 8-3, which was a solid enough start. And then you go on a run after that, winning 6 straight after that. So at that point, you're really on fire. You're 14-3. They did end the year a little bit, maybe not as great as they would have liked. 4-5, kind of just a ho-hum final, few games there. But they did get a very high seed in the Southern Conference tournament. They ended up getting a first round bye in the tournament. I can't remember I think they might have been a 2 seed, something like that to that degree. And they went on a run. And the first game against Georgia Southern, they blew them out 78-46, no contest. Next game after that, which is the semifinals, 84-78 win over App State. And then you get to the championship game against Chattanooga. And boy, oh boy, 71-70 overtime loss to Chattanooga in the championship game. That's a Chattanooga team that won 2 games in March Madness that year. I mean, you get that win, and year one, you take the team to the dance for the first time in a decade. Yeah, you're sitting pretty. And unfortunately, they just fell by the thinnest of margins, just a little bit short. And, obviously didn't get an NIT or anything like that. A couple notable guys on that team. John Brannon, stud that year, 20.9 points per game, 5 rebounds. Keith Venny, 19.8 points per game, 3.2 rebounds. He had a 51-point game against Morehead State. And he had, I guess it's still a record, 15 made threes in that game against Morehead State that year. I mean, that is like Dan Analytics, hillbilly ball back in the day right there. I mean, 15 threes in the game, man. So, Billy Donovan had left at that point, but man, he left quite a bit of talent for Greg White, and he nearly took them all the way to the dance. And then, and you're going toe to toe with a Chat team that won 2 games in the NCAA tournament. I mean, that is nothing to sneeze at. So really good first year, just came up a hair short. Looking at this second year a little bit, they lost a ton of talent from that first team. There's just no question about it. Lost a lot of players. So they kind of fall back a little bit for sure. 11-16 overall, 7-11 in the MAC. This was their first year in Mid-American Conference play. It had been, they had been in the Southern Conference for a long time. First year at the MAC level. They have a decent start, 3-3. But then they get a big opportunity at home. They end up getting a huge non-conference home win over number 23 Wake Forest, 73-66 at home. Great win there. Unfortunately, they were not able to really turn that into much because they lost 8 of their next 11 games. Not a great way to end. They ended up losing early in the MAC tournament to Ball State, 93-76. Just a very young team at that point. They only had 1 senior on that roster, and that 1 senior averaged 1.7 points per game. So very young team. The team from before was senior laden, really good players that were seniors. This team just didn't have that. Another really cool fact about this team, Nate Poole played on this team. That Nate Poole, as in one of Marshall's all-time greatest football wide receivers, played on this basketball team. I thought that was really cool. I really did not process that. So yeah, first year was great. Second year was definitely down, but it was a rebuilding year. So talk about those first 2 years a little bit there.
Well, like you mentioned, the first year he had a lot of pieces left over from the Billy Donovan era. And something that is just amazing to think about is the best player that Billy Donovan ever had at Marshall he didn't even stay. I mean, you think about what would have been able to happen if Jason Williams did not leave to go to Florida with Billy D, but if he stayed here at Marshall, how good that team would have been, and likely they would have probably beaten Chattanooga, and really they probably would have been in the same position as Chattanooga, winning a couple of games in the tournament, having that key guard. But looking through the schedule, you'd mentioned some key points and some big moments. I will say this and point this out. The last game of the regular season, actually, interestingly enough, was against Chattanooga. And the final score, Marshall lost. It was 92-72, lost by 20 points. Unbelievable. I mean, just a terrible night. And then, not very much longer later, just a couple weeks later, they would come back and face them in the championship game, take them to overtime and lose by one. So a huge improvement. I don't know if it was just that they were on the road at Chattanooga whenever they lost the first time. So, I don't know if it was just the home court advantage or whatever, but just the fact that they were able to make that a game kind of shows the grit of the team overall, in my personal opinion. Then you go into that second season of the Greg White era. And like you mentioned, man, they lost a lot of talent. I'm looking at the roster here in front of me, and there's one senior on the entire team, Chris Gray. He averaged 1.7 points a game. He didn't even play hardly. So, you're compiling your entire squad with there's a juniors that had significant playing time, and the rest is freshmen and sophomores. So this was an incredibly, incredibly young team, and not a lot of experience. So, this is whenever the rebuild really is starting. And this is whenever we're going to find, all right, is Greg White a legitimate coach here? Because before, he was able to keep those guys that were over from Billy Donovan, who was recruited by him. But now can he kind of see any type of success moving forward? And so that first year, as a Marshall fan especially, I mean, if you were logical, you would have gotten a pretty good understanding of, okay, this is not the same thing as what we were dealing with last year. This is really the beginning of what we would call a rebuild now that we have a lot of our key talent. And so, year two obviously was not ideal, wasn't something that you'd really love to see. First year in the MAC conference, as you mentioned as well. So this is, a little bit of an elevation in competition week in and week out, and finishing 11-6. So, this is not a great season by any means. Winning against Wake Forest, that's obviously a huge deal at home. I mean, that's awesome. That's an exciting moment. But Coach had a lot of work to do heading into the next year, as now he's kind of at a place where, well, am I really going to be somebody that makes a name for myself here, or am I just going to kind of drown in this mediocrity? And so we're going to find out that there was an improvement that next season.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Big improvement that next season. When we were talking about that Wake Forest game, I had to look that up because I thought at that point that might have been the same era that Tim Duncan was there. But unfortunately, I think he had already moved on at that point, maybe a year or two. But I was like, man, that would have been crazy if he had been at the CAM. I mean, but either way, great win. But yeah, it was definitely a rebuild for sure. But as we would soon find out, the rebuild would start to take shape much nicer the next few years. Looking at the 98-99 season, year number 2 in the MAC, they go from 11-16 to 16-11 overall. They go from 7-11 in the MAC to 11-7 in the MAC. So they literally flipped the whole thing there. Had an 11-5 start to the season. Very good start. But then after that, they did lose 4 straight, including an 85-84 overtime loss to West Virginia. That was a brutal loss, no doubt about it. They ended the season on a high note. They won 5 of their final 6 games in the regular season. So they were rolling into the MAC tournament with more momentum at that point, but unfortunately they did not end the season well that year. They get to the MAC tournament and lose to Kent State 79-76. So one and done in the MAC tournament. But man, you had a couple freshmen, couple newbies coming in that would change the program. J.R. Van Hoos and Tamar Slay. I mean, what else needs to be said? I mean, at that point, you were probably, I don't even think, Mark, that you could even fathom Marshall getting recruits and players of that caliber, but that was what Greg White was able to do. Also had Corny Jackson as a sophomore. Corny Jackson was a very decorated player, as we know. Travis Young as a sophomore, young talent, man, really good young talent. So you knew the future was bright, and this was just one step to getting to that direction. But it was a good year overall, no doubt. So looking at the 1999-2000 season was better. They get back to a 20-win season. They go 21-9 overall, 11-7 in the MAC again. And boy, they started this year 10-0. They started 10-0 with a win over Georgia at the CAM. What in the name of all that is decent is Georgia doing playing us at the CAM? I mean, that is just otherworldly. I mean, I know Georgia wasn't very good at that point, but still, like an SEC school of that caliber playing at the CAM, man, we need to sign that up again. I want some more of that, but that's not going to happen. One of those games also during that stretch, a 127-126 double overtime win over Western Michigan. That is some offense right there. 127-126. I mean, that team could flat score. So you start 10-0, and you end the season. Obviously, you're not going to be able to keep that pace up, but they still ended the season on a pretty strong note. They did win. They finished 9-8 in the final, what would that be, 17 regular season games. So you knew at that point it was going to get more difficult as you got in the meat and potatoes of conference. But they were still, one of the better teams in the MAC that year. They ended up getting a 5 seed in the MAC tournament. And then the first round, they beat Buffalo 83-66. They beat Central Michigan 58-56. And then in the semifinal round, I believe it was the semifinal round, they lost to Miami of Ohio 69-63. So kind of, fell a little bit short there at the end, but still got a couple wins in the MAC tournament. That was the first time since they've joined the MAC that they have won in the MAC tournament. So that was a good step in the right direction. So, I mean, you do get a 20-plus win season. Those aren't always the easiest to come by. And you knew the talent you had was there. You knew you had the talent. I mean, there was no question about it. So talk about those two seasons there, 98 through 2000, because you got some lows, you got some highs, and you got some really very promising players.
Yeah, no doubt. 98, 99 was a year that, there was a vast improvement, and that was no doubt, and thanks to some of the greatest really all-time basketball players that we've ever seen here. J.R. Van Hoos is one of the most physically dominating big men that we have ever seen here. The guy he was rough in the paint, was able to get the easy baskets, rebounds, tip ins, and an excellent rebounder. So, having him as just a true freshman coming in, making a complete splash, I mean, just a huge, huge aspect for Marshall. One of the really unsung guys on that team that I don't think gets a lot of flowers is Travis Young. He was really a solid player. He was a guy that was very consistent, was able to kind of got his buckets and was able to, facilitate things very, very well. You mentioned Cornelius Jackson, of course, now our head coach. That was his first year at Marshall as a sophomore. He originally committed and played for a little bit at Tennessee and then transferred the first year of Greg White's, or I think the second year of Greg White's tenure here, and then was able to play that next season. So him coming was a huge deal and was a great facilitator. So, and then Tamar Slay, he's also one of the just best players that we've seen. So you got this very young nucleus of guys that are freshmen and sophomores that are going to carry this team into the future. And that next season, again, now sophomores and juniors, they did exactly that. That's one of the better seasons that we had seen here. A fantastic start to the year, like you mentioned, winning 10 straight, fantastic. When they got into MAC play, things didn't necessarily go their way as much as you'd really hope for. Overall in the MAC that season, 11-7. And so you just don't love to see that, especially after the very exciting start that they were able to have right there at the beginning. So we're finding that there's a little bit of a trend. There's a problem with consistency. They would go on runs where they would win 4 to 5 to maybe 6 games straight and then lose 2 to 3. And so that would kind of be the crux of this entire program under Greg White. And that the 1999 to 2000 season, going to the MAC championship, winning a couple games. I mean, even though they weren't able to win it all that season, if I'm a Marshall fan back in those days, I'm excited. I'm pumped up because these guys are making a run and they're young. This is not a team to where it's going to be the finished product, so to speak. So, after that 99 2000 season, there was probably a lot of hype around this team heading into 2000 2001 because, this is kind of the accumulation. You got, these really key guys that are now going to be seniors, and then you have these other key guys that are juniors, and so that young nucleus has kind of taken shape, and they've been working together the last couple of seasons, and so that next season, 2000 2001, I would imagine was one of just great optimism and a lot of hope and a lot of expectation. And we'll talk more in depth. I mean, it was a good season. In fact, in the MAC, it was an even better season than last year, but for whatever reason, still they couldn't get everything put together.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it, and that's really kind of what it boils down to. That you have if you're looking at that 2000-2001 season, overall you go 18-9, so I mean that's hardly a bad year, and you do go 12-6 in the MAC. But at that point, that was the most games that they had ever won in the MAC conference, so that's solid. I mean, I don't know exactly what seed that ended up being. I could not remember. I don't think I wrote that down. But either way, that's the most wins you would have had in MAC play up to that point. And much like the year before, they got off to another hot start, 8-1 out of the gate for the Herd. They get a huge win on the road at number 24 Dayton, 67-65. That was when Ron Jersa was there as an assistant, like we talked about on his episode. Big non-conference win. Marshall hadn't beaten a ranked team at that point in a while. Well, actually, no, it was just a couple years ago at Wake Forest. But before that, it had been a while. So that's 2 top 25 wins Marshall's had in a couple years span there. So very nice to, there. And then they did end the regular season. They ended up winning 10 of their final 17 games in the regular season. So, that's a solid enough performance in MAC play. I mean, the MAC at that point, I know Miami of Ohio was pretty lethal back in those days. They had like Wally Zerbiak and different guys, and like the MAC had some good teams back then. It was kind of top heavy, but Marshall competed well in the MAC. Unfortunately, though, the trend, and we talked about this during the Donnie Jones episode, that they did not have a whole lot of success in conference tournament play. Well, that continued in this season because you get to the conference tournament against Ball State and you lose 84-81. So you didn't really give yourself much of a chance to do anything, losing in the first game. So that was disappointing, a disappointing way to end the season because I think you're right. I think there would have had to have been a lot of hype around that season. I mean, you got Van Hoos and Slay and Corney and all these guys that are really good players for us. And it just, it did not translate to the ultimate goal that you would have hoped for, like a conference championship and a March Madness bid. But still a good year, and I'm sure probably going into the next season, which I'm about to talk about, you had more expectations. And this season, the 2001-2002 season, I'm not really sure what went wrong here. It wasn't a bad year. It was just very, very average and just mediocre. 15-15 overall, 8-10 in the MAC. I don't know why, because they had a lot of talent still there. They had these guys still there. So I don't know what happened that year. I can't really put my finger on it. You have an 0-3 start, so that's not a good way to start, obviously. But then you do win 5 straight after that. And, you're sitting there at 8-8 through the first 16 games. And you get a big win over WVU in Charleston, 81-79 in overtime. Really nice win there. You go, unfortunately, after that, you do finish the regular season 5-6 record-wise. So at that point, you're just kind of hovering around 500. You can't really break out of that trend. You got 1 win in the MAC tournament. Give them that much. They did beat Northern Illinois 97-93 in the MAC tournament before eventually losing to Kent State 82-70. Kent State just had our number back then, and they beat us a lot in the MAC tournament, it seems like. So, you go from 2 years ago winning 21 games to this year winning 15. It just kind of, that drop-off really didn't make sense because you still had Slay and Van Hoos, and those are 2 of the top 10 Marshall basketball players of all time. So I don't really know what went wrong that year, but talk about those 2 seasons there, 2000 through 2002, and then we'll talk about that last season after this.
Well, talking about 2001 season, I just like you go into that year and there's just such a great amount of expectation and different things. I mean, you'd think that this would be the year that they put it all together because, just there's so much talent on the team. And for some reason, just things didn't gel. I don't know. And looking at the numbers here, I mean, they're solid numbers. Van Hoos was, doing great, 16.6, points a game and 11 rebounds. So he averaged a double double that entire season. Tamar Slay, that was really his breakout season. He was averaging 17.3 points a game. And then you got two more guys that are averaging double figures in Travis Young and Latace Williams. And then Corney was averaging 9.4. So I mean, he's one of your better players. And but again, he was a great facilitator, 5.7 assists per game. So looking at all these numbers, man, I mean, you would think, man, that's a fantastic team. I'm sure that they went on to do some great and awesome stuff, but whenever you got to that MAC conference, the championship, the tournament, I should say, I don't know what it was. It was just like every time that they would get into the conference tournaments there, they would have a lot of issues and a lot of problems. And I think that's also kind of just reminiscent of the entire team every single season, because whenever you look at these, numbers, again, it's the same problems. You'll win 3, but then lose 2. Win 2, but then lose 3. There's just a very, very, very big lack of consistency. And it's hard. I'm not trying to point fingers at any one person because, I mean, let's just face it, being consistent in a sport like basketball at a collegiate level at Division One, that's a hard thing to do. I mean, it's a hard thing whenever you have school and you have distractions and really, like you mentioned, the MAC itself was top heavy at the time. There's a lot of very talented teams in the MAC. So, when you put all of those things together, it is a hard sport. So that year that was supposed to be like the breakout year, the year things finally get turned around and they're just, they're at a level that they'd never seen before. Well, it didn't really end up that way. And the next season, I mean, just looking at all of these things here, you lost some pretty key guys. You lost your main facilitator, really just the quarterback of the team being Corney Jackson. And that's not to say that Tamar and JR didn't hold up their end of the bargain. I mean, Tamar averaged 18.9 points a game, while JR averaged another double-double with 15 and 10 every single game. So I mean, they were fantastic, and Ronald Blackshear too. I mean, another guy that really came on as a sophomore, 19.6 points a game that season. So I mean, he had a fantastic year as well. But for whatever reason, in 2001, 2002, just average. I mean, in 15 and 15 finish. And I think that is going to be, really, that is the main issue that we find here in the Greg White era, is that it's not really the talent of the players. I mean, that was there. They're breaking records. I mean, this was the best teams that we'd ever seen up to that point, and in a long time at the bare minimum. And they just could not, get everything going whenever it mattered the most. And so that 2001, 2002 season, losing so much talent as you did, even whenever you added Blackshear and he was a fantastic scorer, there was still just an element missing as a team. And that's just why. And sadly, that's how some of the greatest players that we'd ever seen in Tamar and JR would go out in just a 15 and 15 season. They definitely deserved more, and that's just, it kind of stinks that things ended that way.
Yeah, I agree. Very unfortunate way to end for those two guys, because they had been just such superstars for the program. Some of the best players, like I said, unequivocally, in my opinion, 2 of the top 10 Marshall basketball players of all time. I don't think there's any denying that. Stats will tell you that, but they just were. I mean, obviously ended up even doing things at the next level. I mean, they're great players. So obviously, for this final season, we're going to talk about the 2002-2003 season. Obviously, you didn't have either one of those guys, so it was going to be another kind of struggle of a season. And it wasn't that it was that bad. And like you said, Ronald Blackshear, man, he was on fire those last couple years for Greg White. This season, again, we'll talk about more of it here in a minute, but the 02-03 season, they go 14-15 overall, 9-9 in the MAC. So they actually won more MAC games that year, but finished slightly under 500. So that was only one of only 2 years that they did finish under 500 under Greg White. So that's nice very little seasons that weren't at least good. It's just they weren't getting them over the hump. But we'll talk about that later. So this season they start 8-3. It's a good start. I mean, at that point, you probably thought, well, this team might be better than we think. But then after that, they did not end the year very well at all. Just a 5-11 record to end. So not very good there. I mean, it just wasn't quite clicking. Obviously, at that point, you had a lot of talent gone. You had a relatively young roster at that point. So you get back to the MAC tournament, and you do get a win. You beat Eastern Michigan 83-75. But then the nemesis Kent State bites us again, 79-57. That's about the third time they beat us in the MAC tournament, I think, under Greg White. I mean, Kent must have been better than I realized back then. But either way, so 14-15 final season there. No Van Hoos or Slay. But Ronald Blackshear, 20.3 points a game. And he had a game where he made 11 consecutive threes, which tied an NCAA record at that point. I don't know if it still stands, but man, lethal. He would have been perfect for the D'Antoni system 15 years later. Just saying, he would have been perfect. But obviously, he was great for this time period. And then after the 02-03 season, the Herd decides to move on from Greg White, and they end up hiring Ron Jersa, which obviously did not go well at all. But things had kind of started to dip off there at the end. I mean, you don't like seeing the kind of subpar, finishes there. And, the violations of the scholarship reduction thing was starting to kick in at this point too. So that was a factor. So it was just a kind of not a great finish necessarily. But if you look at his overall tenure a little bit, there's quite a bit here to talk about. A lot of kind of, bullet points to discuss. Overall, he goes 115-84, which pretty good on paper. 68-54 conference record, most of those years being the MAC, one of those being the Southern Conference. So he coaches for 7 seasons. He's got the 4th most overall wins in program history behind Rick Huckabee, Dan D'Antoni, and Cam Henderson. So 4th most wins in program history, nothing to sneeze at. Recruited very well. Not just good. He got some top level talents to Marshall. Guys that could have gone anywhere. He got these guys to come to Marshall. There's a few of them in there. We've talked about them. And he got these guys to come to Marshall. So he recruited well. Obviously, players must have been very fond of him if they decided to play there and come for 4 years. Like, obviously, he did a good job. Won consistently for the most part. He only had 2 seasons below 500, and they weren't that bad. I mean, 11-16 isn't good by any means, but it wasn't like rock bottom. And then 14-15 is not like rock bottom either. It's just like you're just below average. Like you're just subpar. Like we've seen, like a few years later, we had a 6-win season. So that's rock bottom. So it wasn't that bad. Had a lot of good years. Had a couple 20-win seasons in there. Just couldn't quite get the team over the hump. And that was the most disheartening part about it, is you had some, like we talked about, top-level talent, blue-chip guys that went on to do amazing things for your program, and they just never quite got the success as an overall team that they needed to have at that point. I mean, their careers are validated, obviously. Who's going to ever question Tamar Slay or J.R. Van Hoos's career at Marshall? Nobody. But they were missing that overall team moment. Like the 2017-18 season got the NCAA tournament and the Conference USA tournament final championship. This era, they were missing that. And that's unfortunate because they had a lot of talent. So that was the one big ding on this run, really, was just the fact they couldn't get over the hump. It did start tapering off at the end for sure. A couple just average or below average years. They were, and I think the thing that I led with this early on, we talked about his first year. If he gets them to that NCAA tournament in year 1, that whole thing shifts. That whole era is different. I mean, that entire era is different. I mean, I'm not saying that like they would have been like world beaters necessarily, but man, that would have totally shifted everything at that point. You getting them to the NCAA tournament in year one, yeah, would have been great. So it is what it is. Unfortunate the way that it ended, because they were a lot better than some of those records said and some of those results said there in the postseason tournaments. So, that was another ding, is just the fact they did not have a lot of success in the MAC tournament. They only got to the semifinals, I think, once or twice, never got to the finals. So that's unfortunate too. So before we close the chapter or the book of the Greg White era, talk about your overall grade for his 7 years as the head coach. A lot of good, a lot of not great, everything in between. So there's a lot to talk about here. So what are you going to grade him?
Yeah, I mean, well, you said it pretty much perfectly. It's a lot of good and a lot of not great. I don't really think anything was bad per se. There were some tough losses, but at the same time, there was never a just catastrophic, horrible, awful, no good, bad season. So, you can't go too low here. And we saw the great talent that he was able to bring in, and a lot of people don't even realize the fact that Mark Patton, one of the more favorites of the early to mid 2000s. That was a Greg White recruit. Just another guy. A.W. Hamilton, Ardu Ampalou, all those guys. They came in under Greg White, so he was a very good recruiter. And I think the consistency was his biggest problem with his teams. Again, I don't know. I'm not trying to cast aspersions as to why all of those things took place. I can't tell you why there was not a whole lot of overall success. Other than the fact of that basketball is just a very difficult game, and sometimes it can be a very unfair game. So, with that in mind, I look at the entire Greg White tenure here, and I think this is fair. I'd give him a B minus, just because some of the best, like two top 25 wins against Wake Forest and Dayton, beating Georgia at home too. That's a huge moment in just our basketball history. Tamar Slade, J.R. Van Hoos, fantastic, would go on to play professional basketball. So really, really good moments. Really, I mean, not a bad tenure by any means. Tapered off there at the end. And it was definitely time, because this was a moment of great change. The whispers of, well, hey, we're trying to get into another conference, and there was this is another conversation maybe for another day. I read an article that at one point there was consideration for Marshall to go to the SEC at one time. That's how good of a football program they were, which would have been. You imagine that. But that was being talked about, at least Big East possibility, Conference USA. Obviously, that's where we ended up. So those whispers are now becoming louder and louder, and change is going to be inevitable. And so, there was a great deal of pressure, I think, that was on Greg White, of saying, all right, you have to win right now, because if you don't win right now, we're going to look like a bunch of just idiots if we try and say, hey, let's get our program into your prestigious conference, but all we got is football and basketball and baseball. It was what it was back in those days. Soccer wasn't even hardly a factor back in those days. So, I mean, football and basketball is really what you leaned on. So it would have been a tough sell. And so I think that's really a lot of pressure that was on Greg White. Win now from the administration, and just couldn't seem to put it together. So I think a B minus is very fair, because, again, good moments, couldn't quite get over the hump, lots of inconsistency, but at the same time, some very, very good memories.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I gave him this era. I'm giving it a flat B. B minus. I totally understand and agree with it, but I just went with a flat B, just because there were a lot of really positives that come out of it. I honestly, to a obviously a little bit at a lesser degree, I kind of view this era in a similar light to the Dan D'Antoni era in a little bit of ways, because obviously they're both from Mullins. They both are Marshall guys. They both kind of had similar seasons. Like, you had some good, some not so good. The only difference is really that D'Antoni was able to get him over the hump. That's really the only difference, and he coached longer and won more games. But like, I would consider those two eras relatively similar. I mean, D'Antoni era was better, clearly, but this was still a good era. He brought in, like I said, a lot of talent. I mean, more talent than we had been used to seeing, put it that way. Got some big time non-conference marquee wins, like we talked about. Wake Forest, Dayton, those are top 25 teams at those points. They beat WVU. They beat Georgia. I mean, those are good wins. You had 2 of the top 10 Marshall basketball players of all time. We talked about that. A lot of excitement. I mean, even without them getting over the hump and, getting to the NCAA tournament or winning a championship or any of that stuff, this had to have been for people that were, in it as much as we're in Marshall athletics now. If you were into basketball at this point, like to that level, it would have had to have been an incredibly exciting time because that was a very fun brand of basketball. I mean, not that can't really quite say it was hillbilly ball, but man, it might have been in the same family. They were playing a different style at that point. And yeah, that was back in the days when people were just feed the center and that would be it. You didn't even hardly shoot that many threes and things, but man, we had some guys that could put the ball through the hoop big time. So really good, some really good moments. Just the ultimate downfall was just we didn't get to the championship level or the NCAA tournament or even the NIT. So I'm going to go with a B overall for the Greg White era. So with that being said, that concludes this one. I was looking forward to talking about this episode just because, I like talking about these Marshall guys. Like, he's a Marshall guy. He's a Marshall legend no matter what. He's got the 4th most wins in Marshall basketball history. That's nothing to sneeze at in its own right. I mean, he did a really good job for Marshall overall. He did a lot of good things for the program. And then obviously we know the hardships that followed it. So that takes, it takes this, you have to really appreciate this era more because we were able to see winning basketball more times than not. And that was not the case after he was shown the door. So unless you got anything else to add, man, that pretty much does it. Any final thoughts or final words?
No, man, go Herd. Like we mentioned, this is 4th overall wins in Marshall basketball history. We are definitely not a power program. We've had moments and we've had teams, but what Greg White was able to bring to this place was special, and it was definitely something by which I think many fans look back and say, man, we were just lucky to be able to go out and watch the team compete the way that they did because they put on a good show. They played hard, and to this day, they still are very loyal to Marshall. These guys, Tamar Slay, his son is on the team. Corny is coaching the team.
Yeah.
I know J.R. Van Hoos is in Kentucky. He stays very close to the program. And, all these guys that were under Greg White, even to this day, are still Marshall fans close to the program. And I think that speaks volume about just the overall way that Greg White ran the program. So, above wins and losses, he did things the right way, and that deserves a tremendous amount of respect.
I agree 100%, and I think you saw a lot of that same stuff with Dan D'Antoni. Well, if you're a Marshall guy and you care that much about the place, and you're going to bring in kids that are going to reciprocate that. They're going to care that much, and they still do. I mean, we just talked to John Elmore, and he said he's watched probably at least 90% of Marshall's games since he left, and that's been 7 years ago. So you build, when you're a Marshall guy and you truly care about Marshall and want to see it succeed, you put the players are going to feed off of that, and it's going to create a lot better things for Marshall long term. Not just a coach that's there to advance their career and then everybody forgets about Marshall. No, that's not what Greg White did. That's not what Dan D'Antoni did. That's not what a lot of these guys did. So got to give him his flowers and respect for that. No doubt about it. But with that, we're done with this one, and we're looking forward to the final episode of the Coaches series coming up, where we go way back in the vault, way back in the archives. We're going back. We're looking at head coach number 1 all the way through Billy Donovan. So we're going way back, and there's a lot to talk about, a lot of pretty interesting, kind of crazy stuff to talk about, really. So it's going to be really good. Like I said, we're getting geared up for football season in the next few weeks. We're really excited to start breaking down into that. Got some nice episodes lined up with some possible guests that would be really interesting for fans to hear from. So it should be good, and we're excited to bring y'all some good content. So with that being said, go Herd. Thank you all for listening.